Um, well, I remember that there was a carload of us from the Dallas News, reporters and editors and like that, who went out to Love Field to see the president arrive on Air Force One. It was a short hop that morning for him because he had been in Fort Worth, and they just flew from the Air Force Base in Fort Worth to Love Field. He and Jacqueline moved down, and JFK was a supreme politician. He was as good as LBJ when it came to pressing the flesh, as LBJ used to call it. And there was a crowd lined up behind a kind of a waist-high steel fence there, and the Dallas police had kept the crowd out of the way of the official airliner. President Kennedy started going along that fence, and he was shaking hands with people and hugging people and all of that, and right down the line. And the people were responding so well. I mean, it was like just they were fans of JFK. And I should mention that Air Force Two was also there with LBJ aboard. There we were on the apron with the, well, actually they'd pulled off away from the busy part of the airport and to deplane. Everybody was hurrying JFK along because he had to get to a luncheon to make a speech, trade more. And so they finally got him into the car, and I don't know, he may have been there yet if he shaking hands and all, because you could tell he loved it. And especially he was surprised to get that kind of treatment in Dallas, which was notoriously conservative, if not reactionary, anyway, they got him in the car, and in the car was really an open car, and that's another story. But so he and Governor Connolly and Nellie, the governor's wife, were all in that limo, driven by a Secret Service man, a few Secret Service men around. But my impression was that JFK was he was a political animal, and he wasn't there to ensure his own security or to to please the Secret Service men. He just waded into crowds and that kind of thing. And I guess sort of like Bobby Kennedy did when he was assassinated in L.A. There were press tickets for the speech, but there was nothing like, I mean, we weren't supposed to be there. The correspondents who were White House correspondents, they were herded onto buses, and they were in the motorcade, but that was like the Washington Press. We were locals, and we had no credentials, to get into the motorcade or anything like that. But I had worked police, and another fellow who was in the car had worked police, and we knew some cops and like that. And I assumed that was why they waved us through. They recognized us, and just waved us on. And so Lou Harris, who was an assistant city editor at that time, he was driving a car. Chicken Louie, we called him. And he was driving the car. And so it was the smartest move that Lewis Harris ever made. I told his son, you know, I wasn't with Lou on his honeymoon, but his proudest moment, as far as I'm concerned, was when he pulled into that motorcade. And he did, and it was pretty aggressive. And so we were back. We weren't, you know, right close to the presidential car, but we were back, I'd say, 8 or 10 cars back in a long motorcade. So anyway, we were well positioned to see what was happening down the way, and we rode in the motorcade through downtown, and everything was going pretty well. There were crowds cheering, and there were, I recall, 1 or 2 maybe incidents where there were some anti-Kennedy signs, or you know, being displayed. But there were nice crowds all the way downtown, and especially downtown. I don't recall crowd estimates for the entire motorcade, but they would have been impressive. You know, there were people lined up, in, if not in vast throngs, at least they were all along the curb all the way downtown. So anyway, and there was one, I was trying to remember, they were distributing this copy of the Dallas Morning News, where it had unwisely sold a full-page ad to some of these reactionaries who bought an ad, and they wrote it, you know, I don't know, like just stuff they were saying about Kennedy in those days, wanted for conspiracy, you know, and this kind of thing. They weren't really as bad as what you see today, you know, but it was pretty bold in those days for, and pretty, I thought, stupid of the Dallas News to sell that ad. But I guess, you know, fair discourse or whatever would require them, maybe, if they took it to court, you know.
Freedom of speech.
Yeah, freedom of speech. And
but you wouldn't question the wisdom of.
But in those days, the Dallas Morning News was a private corporation, and so you have to consider that too. They probably had the right to reject it if they chose. I don't know, but it would have been a legal question there. So some of those were, I didn't see one until later, but some of those were being passed. No, I did. I saw one earlier. But they were being passed along the crowds there, through the crowd. So anyway, we proceeded downtown, and if you recall, the streets there, or the Dallas News is at Young and Houston. We used to say Young and Foolish, but Young and Houston, and so when the motorcade reached Houston Street, it turned right to the north, and no, off Commerce. Okay, when it reached Houston Street, it turned left, and this put them directly in front of the school book depository building, you know, among others. We're all heading, I had an assignment that day to write a color story about the president's visit. And presidential visits were more uncommon back then than they are now. For example, Obama and Patrick were on the same schedule. I mean, Austin. Obama was at Houston, Austin, and Dallas with you from Austin. Anyway.
On the same trail.
Yeah. And did you know that?
Yeah, I heard he was coming to town.
You saw his tracks here and there?
I didn't see any tracks,
Okay.
but I heard of it.
Anyway, as the motorcade turned there, made that turn in front of the school book depository building, only it was not, I don't think anybody knew it by that name or even cared, because it was not a particularly,
noteworthy building.
There's nothing about the architecture of it or anything that would attract your eye, and there were more interesting buildings around it. So, anyhow, when they turned, well, we being in the motorcade, we were just following them, and loosely, I was thinking, that I'd just stay with them and to the trademark and then do color from there. And anyhow, when the shooting started, somebody in the car said, it was a firecracker. It wasn't a firecracker. It didn't even sound like a firecracker. It was a high-powered rifle. And so I said, well, somebody needs to bail out here, and I'll do it, since everybody who had an assignment there had a definite specified assignment that had to do with the speech, really. Mine was more general. And so I said, well, I'll get out here and see what's going on. The motorcade came to virtually a total stop when the shooting started, and which I think it was just because the drivers were startled, and I did not see President Kennedy when he was shot. I didn't see him hit, actually. What I could see, and we were along there, I don't know, there in Dealey Plaza, named for the founder of the Dallas Morning News, E.B. Dealey. Dealey Plaza is just a kind of a picturesque little park right there in the downtown. So we, being Lou Harris's carload of newspapermen, we were back on Dealey Plaza there, but we had a nice view of the motorcade as they turned to head out to Trademark. And I didn't see JFK actually hit, but I saw Jackie climb out of the limo. She was climbing on the back of it. I learned later that she was reaching for pieces of bone and brain that were back on what would be a turtle back on an ordinary automobile, but it kind of extended back. And a Secret Service man was trying to shove her back into the limo. And so anyhow, I was pretty confused because I didn't know when the motorcade resumed. I mean, it took off under the triple underpass there. And Lou Harris in his carload of newspaper men went on as they should have. But there I was, and I'm thinking, well, there goes my story, you know, under the triple underpass. And there were people falling down on the grass around there, and all of them seemed to be pointing up to the fence of the later notorious grassy knoll. And I was confused because there was an unbelievable element to it. I was just surprised and shocked that this was happening. And what ran through my mind was an old cavalry slogan that dated back to the horse cavalry. If you know, when you're confused in battle, ride to the sound of guns. And so I ran toward the depository mill. Well, actually, as I got there, the people, most of them, as I said, were pointing up to the fence on the grassy knoll. And so I decided, well, I better go up there and take a look. And which I did. And I went over the fence. I think there was there was a uniformed cop went over ahead of me, I believe, but I was among the very first to go over that fence. And when I got on the other side of it, there's an old wino sitting there. And I mean, I didn't see any, that's why I've always argued against this second shooter conspiracy theories and all of that, because I was there and there was nothing suspicious behind that fence. And this wino sitting there on the curb, I walked up to him, I said, "What's happening?" And he said, "What's happening?" And I'm wasting my time here. And so I made my way quickly back to the school depository building. All this happened so fast that I was able to go in with the first wave of cops into the depository building. And here's an interesting thing for business majors. When I saw what the way the cops were planning to search that building, I thought maybe we'd all go up together, you know, jammed in elevators, and we'd start at the top and work down. And that's not the way they did it, though. You know, they were smarter now. They started unloading men on each floor, and that was what they were going to do, and it makes sense. Well, anyway, right away I saw, and it being a 7-story building, that I better do it my way and go floor by floor and see what's going on here. So there were some offices, like business offices, maybe publication offices in that school book depository building, which was just a warehouse really for storing school books. But they came in big cases, you know, and they were all over the place. It was built for a manhunt. I mean, it was. So I started talking to people who were in the offices there, and this one woman told me, I saw his hair flying up. Speaking of the president, I saw his hair, and I knew then that this wasn't going to be that this was probably a fatal shot, because until then, everybody was hoping, you know, that he was wounded maybe and could recover. But when he said, when she said she saw his hair flying up, and given the sound, those high-powered rifle sounds, I knew he's probably dead, and so proceeded with that idea in mind, and worked my way up to the 6th floor, and there was kind of a concentration of detectives and there, and so I decided that was the most interesting spot I had seen, and sure enough, it turned out to be the sniper's nest, and and it was all right there. You could tell where the assassin had built his sniper's nest beside the window there on the 6th floor, and he'd drunk a Dr. Pepper and eaten some piece of chicken or something there, and it was at lunchtime, remember. It's 12:30, I think, is the official time of the shooting. This one detective over across the room, it's a huge room there, and I would say it's stacked with these boxes of books, and looked a little like my office.
I was just going to say, that sounds
that's
like
what
home.
you were thinking.
Yeah.
Anyhow, this Captain Will Fritz was another reason I chose to stay on the 6th floor, was because Captain Fritz was a legendary Dallas policeman and a long-time chief of homicide, and I figured if he was there, that was the place to be. So anyway, one of the detectives called from across the room, and this was a big room with a few officers around, but mostly it was just space for stacking books. And this detective yelled, "Over here, Captain." So Captain Prince and I went over there to see what he was. And he had found stacked under, I don't know, maybe a couple of cases of books there. But on the floor you could see the muzzle of this rifle sticking out from under. And over here, you can see the butt plate sticking out. So that was it. Well, the way my mind was working that day, when it was working, was that there was I was trying to count the shots. I was pretty sure there were 3 shots, you know, and I thought that maybe he had devoted the first 2 shots there to the presidential limousine. And I had this feeling that because it was such a horror to begin with, that he had saved it. And that 3rd shot was he had shot himself and committed suicide right there. It seemed like what else would you do after you shoot the President of the United States? And but interestingly, I should have mentioned this too, that I may have walked right by Oswald when I ran into the building with the cops, but because the fella who ran the school book depository building, Roy Truly, had told a policeman that this fella, and they were on the first floor there, that this fellow's okay, he works here. And so that was when Oswald walked out. Well, as he walked out, I was running in, and so I wouldn't have noticed him, but I should have, because I knew what Lee Harvey Oswald looked like, and I didn't know it. I just forgot him. That when I was working on the old Fort Worth Press, now long remembered, but anyhow, that was when Oswald defected to Russia. He had been a U.S. Marine, and then he had
Gone over to Russia?
yeah, he had defected to Russia and married a Russian girl, Marina, and then had lost his enthusiasm for communism and wanted to come back to the States, and he did. But when he had first defected, he was a big story because Marines weren't supposed to do that, and but he did, and this was when he had first defected, and I was in Fort Worth, and tried to, his mother was living in Fort Worth, and we got his mother, and who else was on the line? Anyway, we got up kind of a conference call. I don't know if they were called that in those days, but his mother was on line, and I was, and it seems to me there was somebody else, maybe Seth Cantor, who was another preacher writer there. Well, he came to the phone. I called him at the Metropole Hotel in Moscow, which still stands, I think, doesn't it? You know?
Sure.
And, so I had called him there, and he came to the phone, and just like, hello. And I wanted to say this real quickly because I thought this would be a good selling point for him to give me an interview right then on the telephone. And I said, Lee, your mother's on the other extension, and wanted to, talk with you. Well, he didn't hang up. He just dropped the phone. A drop call, I would say nowadays. But anyway, he just left it hanging apparently on the line there, and this was in the, my impression was he's in the lobby. So this was right after, he was still a celebrity in Moscow. And he wouldn't come back to the phone. And when he found out his mother was there, and I learned later that they were on terrible terms. That Lee and his mother were, scarcely speaking, and had been that way for years. Well, I didn't know that. I thought with his mother on the line, he'd get on, "Hi, Mom," that kind of. No, sir. Anyway, she was his mother was, how shall I say it, different.
That's a nice way of saying something.
Special.
And so anyhow, I should have tumbled right away. When Roy Truly came up there and told Captain Fritz, we had a roll call. This was after lunch, and we had a roll call here in the building after lunch, and there was one worker didn't show up for the roll call. His name is Lee Oswald. And so my impression was there had been an earlier roll call and there were several missing. But this time, this was later in the afternoon, there was only one missing person at the roll call. And that was, as he identified him, Lee Oswald. And I should have tumbled right then, but there was, oh yeah, that I was there when cops came in and said, Captain Fritz, we've got a man down in Oak Cliff. But nobody connected that to the assassination immediately. Well, of course, that's Officer Tippett, who had just been killed by Lee Oswald. So there were two newsmen in that building for the first hours after the killing. And one was Tom Ayala from Channel 8, and the other was me. So I felt like, well, I wanted to get to a typewriter so I could type the story, and it was, I felt like they'd put out an extra, and anyhow,
Did you type a story?
No, what I did, I felt like I ought to get back to the office because I was sort of out of touch there. I knew what the police knew at that point, but that was all. And I wondered what else is going on. Did somebody take a shot at Lyndon too, or is he dead, or what's going on? And we heard, anyway, we were just getting enough input there to be interesting. And so I decided, well, now's a good time to split and go back to my office. Went down to go out the front door, and there must have been 100 newsmen down there trying to get in, and the cops wouldn't let them in. And I walked out, feeling pretty good. Started to the walk, it's just a couple of blocks to the news building there, and I was walking there and thinking about all that was going on, and it suddenly occurred to me, Lee Oswald, it sounded so familiar. Lee Harvey Oswald, okay, I remembered him then, and doing the story on him. I interviewed his mother and interviewed his brother. And I should have thought of it earlier, but my exclusive was vaporized before I got back to the office because he was identified on the wires, and every paper in the country had the name of Lee Harvey